Ren Holloway's hands didn't shake when she crossed that room. They should have. Every eye in that parlor was on her, measuring the cut of her dress, the steadiness of her chin, the sheer nerve of a merchant's daughter standing among Virginia's finest. But it wasn't the silk-draped women that stopped her cold. It was the man in the servant's coat near the far wall, sweat at his collar, dignity still in his spine, holding an empty glass that not one soul in that glittering room had thought to refill. She refilled it herself, and nothing was ever the same again. If this kind of story moves something in your chest, subscribe to this channel and follow along to the very end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1815 didn't care much for mercy. It came in hot and relentless over the Virginia hills, baking the cobblestones outside Hargrove Manor until they shimmered, pressing down on every living thing that didn't have the good fortune to be born into money or shade. Inside, though, the manor breathed differently. Crystal chandeliers, cold lemonade in sweating glasses, the rustle of expensive fabric, and the low, practiced laughter of people who'd never once worried about the price of bread. Ren Holloway stood at the edge of all of it and felt exactly like what she was, a woman who did not belong. "Hold your chin up," her mother had told her that morning, lacing her into the borrowed gown with fingers that trembled just slightly. "You hold that chin up, Renata, and you don't let any of them see a single crack. Not one." Ren had nodded. She'd gotten good at nodding, at smiling with the right degree of warmth, at saying very little and meaning even less, which seemed to be the primary social currency of Virginia's upper class. She was 22 years old, the daughter of a man who'd built a modest fortune in dry goods, and then lost most of it in the single disastrous shipping contract 3 years prior. What remained was the house, the reputation, thin as paper now, and an invitation to the Hargrove summer gathering, extended by way of old friendship between her father and Edmund Hargrove, a man whose fortunes had only climbed while theirs had fallen. "It's a kindness," her father had said when the invitation arrived. Ren hadn't called it that. She called it exposure. Walking into a room full of people who already knew the shape of your humiliation and wanted to see it up close. But she'd come anyway, because her mother asked her to. Because there was a rumor, thin and brittle as all rumors were, that the Duke of Ashford would be in attendance, and that the Duke of Ashford was the sort of man whose notice could change the trajectory of a family's fortunes. A man of that standing, with lands and influence spread across 3 counties, could open doors with a single word. Her father didn't say any of this directly. He didn't have to. Ren understood the assignment. She just wasn't sure she could execute it without losing something important in the process. "Miss Holloway," a woman materialized at her elbow. Mrs. Cecily Pratt, round-faced and bright-eyed, the sort of woman who collected social information the way some men collected coins. "How lovely that you could attend. We were all so... well, we weren't sure you'd be coming, given, you know." She made a small, vague gesture with her fan that managed to encompass every misfortune Ren's family had suffered in 3 words and a wave of painted silk. "My family wouldn't miss it," Ren said pleasantly. "Mr. Hargrove has always been a dear friend." Of course, of course." Cecily leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice to that particular register that wasn't really low at all. "Though I must say, I did hear that your father's latest venture in Baltimore, the textile business, hasn't been going quite as hoped." "All ventures take time to grow, Mrs. Pratt." "Naturally," Cecily smiled with all her teeth. "Well, do enjoy the evening, dear." She was gone before Ren could draw a full breath, swept back into the glittering current of other conversations, already turning to murmur something to the woman beside her. Ren watched her go and felt the old familiar clench in her stomach. Not quite shame, not quite anger. Something in between that she'd never found the right word for. She reached for a glass of lemonade from a passing tray and turned toward the windows. That was when she saw him. He was standing near the far end of the room, close to the wall, in the dark coat of a household servant. He held a silver tray that was nearly empty, just one remaining glass, and he stood very still, in the way that people stand still when they're trying not to be noticed. His jaw was set. His eyes moved across the room in a slow, controlled sweep that didn't match anything about the servant's role he appeared to be playing. Ren noticed, because she'd spent the better part of the last 3 years learning to look at things other people didn't think were worth their time. His glass was empty. She could see it from where she stood. His own glass, tucked just behind the tray where he'd set it down, forgotten in the way that servants were always forgotten. Every other person in this room had been refreshed twice over. No one had looked twice at him. She didn't think about it long. She crossed the room, plucked the empty glass from behind his tray, and walked to the refreshment table at the side of the room. She poured lemonade into it, good and cold, nearly to the rim, and carried it back. "You look like you could use this more than I could," she said, and held it out to him. He looked at the glass. Then he looked at her. Up close, the first thing she registered was that his eyes were the color of deep water, dark and still and complicated in a way that made her feel, briefly, like she was being read rather than looked at. The second thing she registered was that his hands, wrapped around the edge of the tray, were not the hands of a man who'd spent his life carrying things for other people. They were steady, careful, completely controlled. "Miss," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. There's no need." "There's every need," Ren said. "You've been standing in this corner for the better part of an hour, and not a single person has offered you so much as a glance. That seems like poor hospitality on everyone's part." Something shifted behind his eyes. A slight tightening, quickly controlled. "I'm here to serve, miss, not to be served." "You're here to stand on your feet for hours in a room full of people who won't look at you," Ren said calmly. "That's thirsty work, regardless of the title attached to it." A beat of silence. Then, very slowly, he took the glass from her hand. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't a servant's thank you. It was the thank you of a man who didn't give that word away easily, and meant it completely when he did. "Don't mention it," Ren said. She started to turn away. "You don't recognize me." It wasn't a question. He said it with a quiet kind of attention, like a man confirming something he'd already suspected, but wanted to be certain of. Ren turned back. "Should I?" He studied her for a moment. There was no performance in it, no flirtation, no pretense, just a straight, level look that she found unexpectedly difficult to hold, and then found she didn't want to look away from. "No," he said at last. "I don't suppose you should." "That's a curious answer." "It's a curious evening." She almost laughed. She caught it in time and turned it into something more socially appropriate. A slight curve of the lips, contained and proper. "I'm Ren Holloway." "I know who you are, Miss Holloway." That pulled her up short. "Do you?" "Your father is Thomas Holloway. He built Holloway Dry Goods on Market Street in Richmond before the shipping losses. You have a younger brother at university in Philadelphia. You play the piano, and you prefer books to needlework, which has been the quiet scandal of your social circle for the better part of a decade." Ren stared at him. "You," she said carefully, "are not a servant." "No," he agreed, "I'm not." "Then what are you doing standing in the corner with a tray?" He glanced across the room, a slow, almost tired survey, and for just a moment, something that looked like bone-deep weariness moved across his face. "Listening," he said. "People say remarkably honest things when they believe no one important is paying attention." "And what have you heard tonight that was worth the trouble?" The ghost of something, not quite a smile but close, moved at the corner of his mouth. That you told Cecily Pratt that all ventures take time to grow, he said. And that you meant something considerably sharper than that. This time, Ren did laugh, short and genuine, before she caught herself. You were close enough to hear that? I move through rooms quietly, he said. It's a useful skill. For a man who isn't a servant. For a man who finds rooms like this one exhausting, he said. The word came out with careful precision, like he'd chosen it over several others and settled on that one for its accuracy. Exhausting and occasionally instructive. Ren considered him for a moment. She was aware that she'd been standing in this corner, talking to a man she didn't know for longer than was probably advisable, and that at least 2 sets of eyes across the room had registered this and were in the process of cataloging it for future use. She was also aware that she didn't particularly care. You still haven't told me your name, she said. No, he said. Are you going to? He looked at her steadily. Not tonight. That's... She searched for the right word. Inconvenient. Most honest things are. Before she could respond to that, a voice cut across the room, high, carrying, precise as a blade. Miss Holloway! Ren turned. Lady Arabella Ashford moved through the crowd the way certain women learn to move, with absolute certainty that the room would part for her. She was perhaps 60, dressed in lavender silk, her silver hair swept up in an immaculate arrangement. Her face was handsome in the way that wealth and strong will could make a face handsome, and her eyes, fixed on Ren, were calculating in a way that Ren recognized immediately because she'd seen that look before. Usually right before something happened that she hadn't been warned about. Lady Arabella, Ren said, and managed a curtsy that she was privately proud of. My dear girl, Lady Arabella took her hands, firmly, not affectionately, and held them for a moment that was just slightly longer than comfortable. I've been meaning to find you all evening. You look, well, you look exactly as I expected. She let go of Ren's hands and glanced toward the corner where the not-servant still stood, then away again, with a speed and deliberateness that told Ren this glance was not accidental. Walk with me. It was not a request. Ren walked. Lady Arabella guided her through the crowd with a hand at her elbow that steered without appearing to steer, moving them toward a quieter stretch of the room near the east windows. Your father sends his apologies for not attending tonight, she said. His leg has been troubling him, Ren said. Of course it has. Lady Arabella's tone managed to convey that she found this convenient without quite saying so. I was sorry to hear about the Baltimore venture. Such a difficult climate for newcomers. We're managing, thank you. Lady Arabella stopped, turned, and looked at Ren with an attention that felt nothing like kindness. I'll be direct with you, Miss Holloway, because I think you're a girl who can handle directness better than most. She paused just long enough to make clear that this was a conditional compliment. My son will inherit 3 estates, a shipping concern, and responsibilities that would crush most men. He requires certain things in a wife, in the woman who will stand beside him. Ren's chest went very still. You're speaking to me about your son, she said carefully. I'm speaking to you about opportunity, Lady Arabella said, which is a thing your family currently has very little of, and which I am in a position to provide, in exchange for a degree of cooperation. What kind of cooperation? The kind that begins with making yourself visible, Lady Arabella said. Present, agreeable, not, she added, her eyes moving briefly toward the corner of the room, spending the better part of your evening talking to the household staff. The blood moved up into Ren's face before she could stop it. Not embarrassment, something hotter than that. I see, she said. Do you? Lady Arabella's voice softened. but not warmly. "I think you do, Miss Holloway. You're a clever girl. Clever enough to know that cleverness alone doesn't change one's circumstances. That sometimes a woman must be strategic." "Strategic," Ren repeated. "Your family's name still carries some weight," Lady Arabella said. "It needn't be allowed to fade entirely. There are arrangements that could be mutually beneficial." She smiled, and it reached none of the rest of her face. "Think on it. We'll speak again before the evening's end." She was gone. Ren stood very still for a moment, looking at the place where Lady Arabella had been. Her hands were locked together in front of her to keep them from showing anything they might feel, and she was working through the conversation backward, the way she always did, turning it over to see which parts were straightforward and which parts had edges she'd missed. All of it had edges. She turned. The man in the servant's coat was still in his corner. He wasn't looking at her, or rather, he was looking away from her in the particular careful way that people look away when they've been watching and don't want you to know. His glass was still in his hand. Ren crossed back to him. "Lady Arabella Ashford," she said, without preamble. His expression didn't change. "Yes?" "She's your mother." A pause. "What gave it away?" "She looked at you like she owned you," Ren said, "and like she was furious about it." Something happened in his face at that. A crack in the controlled surface, brief and unguarded, gone almost before she'd seen it. But she'd seen it. "She does," he said, "own me, in all the ways that matter to her. And you're here in a servant's coat because I needed one evening," he said, "where no one looked at me and saw a title and a fortune and a set of obligations." He looked at her directly then, and the steadiness of it was almost startling. "I didn't expect anyone to offer me lemonade." "I didn't expect to be talking to a duke," Ren said. "I haven't confirmed that. You haven't denied it either." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Kais," he said. "My name is Kais Ashford." She'd known it was coming, and still felt something shift in the center of her chest when he said it. Duke of Ashford. The man her father had mentioned. The man Lady Arabella had just positioned Ren toward like a piece in a chess game she hadn't agreed to play. "Ren Holloway," she said, for the second time that evening. "Though you already knew that." "I did." "And you talked to me anyway." "You offered me lemonade," he said, "when you didn't know who I was, when there was nothing to be gained by it." He paused. "It's been a long time since someone did something for me that had no calculation in it." Ren looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Ashford." "Kais." "I should tell you something," she said. "Your mother just spent 5 minutes implying that I should make myself visible to you for the benefit of my family's financial situation. So I want to be clear that whatever this conversation has been, whatever this evening has been, it started before I knew who you were. I want that on the record." He studied her. "The record," he said. "The record," she confirmed. "I don't want there to be any confusion about the order of events." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but closer than anything she'd seen from him all evening. "The order of events," he said slowly, "is that you crossed a crowded room to give a man in a servant's coat a glass of lemonade because he looked thirsty and no one else had noticed." "That's correct." "And then you talked to him for 20 minutes. Approximately." "And then his mother arrived and made things complicated." "Considerably." He looked down at the glass in his hand, still nearly full, she noticed. He hadn't drunk much of it. "Miss Holloway," he said. "Ren." He said her name carefully, like he was trying the weight of it. "I have spent the last 3 years being handled, managed, introduced, evaluated, and maneuvered by every family in Virginia with a daughter of marriageable age, and every one of those interactions has had the exact same texture as the one you just had with my mother." He paused. "This one didn't." "No," she agreed. "It didn't." "I'd like it to stay that way." She held his gaze. Across the room, she was aware of eyes on them. Cecily Pratt's, sharp and bright. Lady Arabella's, narrowed and watchful. Others she couldn't name, who were already assembling the pieces of what they were seeing into a story they'd carry home and talk about over breakfast. "Your mother," Ren said, "is going to make that very difficult." "My mother," Kai said, with a quietness that was more dangerous than anger, "makes everything very difficult. It hasn't stopped me yet." Ren thought about her own mother's hands that morning, trembling slightly as they worked the laces. "Hold your chin up. Don't let them see a single crack." She thought about Lady Arabella's hand on her elbow, steering her like a horse. She thought about the way Kais Ashford had taken the glass of lemonade from her hands and said thank you like he meant every letter of it. "I need to circulate," she said. "If I stay in this corner any longer, the story will write itself." "It already has," he said, "in about 6 different versions." "Then I might as well let them be wrong." She took a step back. "It was a pleasure, Mr. Ashford." "Kais," he said again. She held his eyes for one moment longer than she should have. "Kais," she said, and she turned and walked back into the light, her chin up, her hands steady, carrying with her the unsettling and entirely inconvenient knowledge that the one person in that room who had felt honest, who had felt real, was the man her family needed her to catch, and his mother intended to use her to reach. And that somehow, impossibly, she'd gotten to him first by knowing nothing at all. Across the room, Lady Arabella Ashford watched her go, and for the first time in a long evening, something behind her careful eyes looked uncertain. The talk started before Ren reached the other side of the room. She could feel it, that particular shift in the air that happened when a crowd found something worth chewing on. 2 women near the fireplace stopped mid-sentence and watched her pass. A man she didn't recognize leaned toward his companion and said something behind his hand. Cecily Pratt had already moved on to a new cluster of guests, and Ren didn't need to hear a single word to know exactly what was being passed around that room like a dish at Sunday supper. She kept walking, chin up, hands loose at her sides. Her cousin Dorothea materialized at her elbow from somewhere near the punch table. Small, dark-haired, eyes bright with something caught between alarm and fascination. "Ren," she breathed, "what on earth were you doing?" "Having a conversation." "With him?" "With a man who needed a drink," Ren said. "I didn't know who he was." "Everyone knows who he is." Dorothea grabbed her arm and steered her slightly sideways, out of the main current of foot traffic. "Kais Ashford, Ren. The Duke of Ashford. He hasn't attended one of these gatherings in nearly 2 years. There was talk that he'd gone entirely private after his father died. And the first thing he does when he shows up dressed like one of the household staff is stand in a corner and talk to you for half an hour. 20 minutes. Ren. I'm not being cavalier, Ren said. I genuinely didn't know. If I'd known, I probably would have behaved considerably more carefully and gotten considerably less out of the conversation. Dorothea stared at her. What does that mean? It means he's not what I expected. She glanced back across the room. Kais was gone from his corner. The tray sat abandoned on a side table, the servant's coat nowhere in evidence. He'd moved somewhere and she couldn't see him, which was somehow more unnerving than seeing him standing there watching her. Lady Arabella spoke to me. Dorothea's face changed immediately.
What did she say?
She suggested that my family's circumstances and her son's requirements might be mutually beneficial. Ren said it flatly, the way you said something when you needed to look at it without feeling it. She wants me to make myself visible to him.
That's...
Dorothea hesitated.
That's actually an extraordinary opportunity.
It's a transaction, Ren said. She wants someone manageable. Someone who needs enough that she can keep a hand on the strings.
Ren, your father...
I know what my father needs. The words came out sharper than she intended. She softened them.
I know. I'm not saying no to anything. I'm saying I want to understand what I'm walking into before I take another step.
Dorothea looked at her for a long moment with something in her face that was part worry and part old, tired love.
You always need to understand everything first, she said quietly. Sometimes you just have to move.
And sometimes, Ren said, moving without understanding is how you end up somewhere you can't get out of. She left Dorothea at the punch table and moved through the room alone, doing what she'd been brought here to do, smiling at the right people, saying the right amount of nothing, letting herself be seen. She was good at this part. She'd had 3 years of practice at performing normalcy over a foundation of held breath. She found her aunt near the east wall and stayed close to her for a while, contributing to conversations about the summer heat and the state of the roads, and whether the Hargroves had redecorated since last year. She laughed at the right moments. She deflected with grace. She did not look across the room for Kais Ashford. She looked twice. Both times she didn't find him. The third time, he found her. She was standing at the edge of a conversation she'd largely stopped listening to, when a voice came low and close at her left shoulder. Don't react. And she managed, barely, not to. Kais had changed out of the servant's coat. He was in a dark evening jacket now, proper and perfectly fitted, and standing close enough that the conversation they were about to have would look, to any observer, like precisely the kind of formal social exchange that happened at every gathering of this type. He had a glass in his hand, a different glass. He lifted it slightly toward her in a ghost of acknowledgement. You changed, she said, without turning her head more than a fraction. People were starting to wonder why one of the servants kept appearing in different parts of the house. Were you not concerned they'd wonder that before? Before, I was enjoying myself too much to care. He paused. Your cousin is watching us. My cousin watches everything. It's her primary hobby. Ren kept her voice level and her eyes forward. Your mother is also watching. My mother has been watching since the moment I walked in. She's been watching this specific moment since before I arrived. He said it without bitterness, but without any softness either. Just the clean, undecorated truth of a man who'd spent a long time understanding something he didn't like. She planned for you to be here, Miss Holloway. The bottom of Ren's stomach dropped an inch. She kept her face exactly where it was. I beg your pardon? The invitation to your family, he said. It didn't come through Hargrove. It came through my mother's correspondence. She arranged it. Ren was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, which was the time it took her to trace back through every conversation, every assumption, every careful step she'd taken since the invitation arrived, and understand that the floor had been arranged under her feet before she'd ever thought to look down. She arranged it, Ren said.
She had a list, Kais said. Women whose families had enough name and not enough money. Women who would be, as she put it once, and I was not meant to hear it, grateful enough to stay in place. He kept his voice perfectly conversational, the way you had to in a room like this. She's been managing this process for 2 years, since before my father was cold in the ground.
And you're telling me this because... Because you told me you wanted the order of events on the record, he said. This is part of the order of events. Ren breathed in slowly. What do you want from me, Mr. Ashford? Nothing. He said it immediately. I don't want anything from you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what game is being played before you decide whether to play it. He paused. Most of the women my mother has introduced me to didn't get that courtesy. I found it bothered me more every time. So you're offering me, what? Information, so I can make a choice.
So you can make your own choice, he said.
Yes. Ren looked across the room to where Lady Arabella stood in conversation with Edmund Hargrove, silver-haired and composed, perfectly at ease in a world she'd spent decades constructing. Ren thought about her father at home, with his leg and his ledgers, and the Baltimore venture that everyone in this room seemed to know had not gone as hoped. My family needs the connection, she said. It cost her to say it plainly. She said it anyway. I know. And you? What do you need? He was quiet for long enough that she turned, slightly, to look at him. He was looking at the room, not at any particular person, just the room itself, in that same tired way she'd seen earlier in the evening, like a man who'd been reading the same chapter for too long. My father died 14 months ago, he said. My mother has been running this estate and 3 others for the past decade while I was elsewhere, learning, making mistakes where they couldn't embarrass the family. His jaw tightened slightly. Now I'm home, and I need to be. What she needs me to be. What the land needs. What 300 tenants and 2 centuries of family obligation need. He paused. What I need has not been a relevant consideration for some time. That's a profoundly unhappy answer, Ren said. Yes, he agreed. It is. Something in the exchange settled into her chest with unexpected weight. She recognized the shape of it, the specific loneliness of being necessary and unknown at the same time, of being needed by everyone for what you could provide, and seen by no one for what you actually were. She'd felt it in her own way, at her own scale. She hadn't expected to find it in a duke. What were you listening for? She asked. Tonight, in the corner. He glanced at her. You said people say honest things when they don't think anyone important is paying attention, she said. What were you hoping to hear? Another pause. Longer. Whether anyone in this room actually liked my mother, he said, or whether they were all performing the same way she was, the same way I was supposed to be. And? Performing, he said flatly. Every one of them. Except me. Except you. He met her eyes for a moment. You told Cecily Pratt that all ventures take time to grow, and your face said something considerably more interesting than that. My face says too much, Ren said. I've been told this repeatedly. It says true things, he said. In rooms full of people saying constructed things, that's noticeable. Before she could respond to that, the dynamic of the room shifted. One of those invisible currents that move through gatherings when someone of consequence changed position. And Lady Arabella was moving toward them with the particular inevitability of a woman who had decided that something was going to happen and was going to ensure it did. Ren felt Kais register it at exactly the same moment she did. A slight straightening in this posture that told her he was moving from whatever this had been back into the version of himself that the room required. She's coming, Ren said. Yes. What do I do? Whatever you decide, he said. That's the point. Lady Arabella arrived like a weather system, deliberate, total, and impossible to redirect. She moved between them with a smooth pivot of her body that was technically graceful and functionally a fence. positioning herself at Ren's side and angling slightly toward her son in a way that made the three of them a unit, while making absolutely clear who held the center of it. "Kais," she said warmly, with an inflection that was warm the way marble was warm when the sun had been on it for an hour. "I see you found Miss Holloway." "She found me, actually," Kais said. "Earlier." Lady Arabella smiled at Ren.
"My son has been telling me what a singular young woman you are, Miss Holloway. Your instincts are remarkable. Noticing a man in need of refreshment, responding without hesitation. It speaks to a very particular quality of character." The compliment was a blade dressed in silk, and Ren recognized it as such. "You're very kind, Lady Arabella." "I'm practical," the older woman corrected gently. "Kindness is sentiment. What I have is appreciation for useful qualities." She paused with the precision of someone who knew exactly how long a pause needed to be. "I wonder, Miss Holloway, whether you might be free next Tuesday. I'm hosting a small gathering, very informal, just a few families, at Ashford Park. I think you'd find it illuminating." There it was, the next step in a game Ren hadn't agreed to play, offered with a smile, and wrapped in the specific kind of warmth that had a hand at the back of your neck. She felt Kais watching her. Not directing, watching. The difference mattered. "I'll need to check with my mother," Ren said pleasantly. "She manages our calendar." "Of course." Lady Arabella reached out and patted her hand with a touch that was brief and assessing and final. "Do let me know by Thursday." She turned to her son. "Kais, Edmund is looking for you. Something about the mill property." She touched his arm once, lightly, and moved away. Kais and Ren stood in the space she'd vacated. "Mill property," Kais said quietly. "There is no mill property discussion." "I know," Ren said. "She wanted to see whether you'd say yes." "I know that too." Ren looked at the backs of her own hands for a moment. "She's very good. She's had 60 years of practice." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to accept the invitation." "My family needs the connection," Ren said again. She said it steadily, not as resignation, but as fact. The kind of fact you had to look at straight on if you were going to do anything useful with it. "But I want to be clear about something." She looked at him. "If I walk into Ashford Park next Tuesday, I'm walking in as myself, not as a piece in your mother's arrangement, not as a name attached to a family circumstance." She held his gaze. "Are those terms you can work with?" He looked at her for a long, still moment. "Yes," he said. "Then I'll tell my mother about the invitation." She started to move away, and he said quietly, "Ren." She stopped. "The mill property," he said. "It actually does exist. It belonged to a family that fell into debt 3 years ago. My mother acquired it at reduced value during a difficult season." He paused. "Your family's shipping losses. The Baltimore venture." She did research before she sent that invitation. The air went out of the room. Not all of it. Just enough. Ren turned back slowly. "She knows," she said. "She knows enough," he said. "She chose your family specifically because of what happened. Because it made you eligible for what she needs." His voice didn't change. "I thought you should know that too." Ren stood very still and felt something cold move through her. Not quite fear, not quite fury. Something made of both that settled into her bones with horrible clarity. Lady Arabella hadn't found her. She hadn't stumbled into this gathering by proximity or luck or old friendship. She'd been selected, researched, chosen because her family's broken edges made her a shape that fit a particular hole in someone else's design. "How long have you known?" she asked. 3 weeks, he said.
I found the correspondence by accident. I didn't know who you were at the time, just a name on a list." He paused. "And then I came tonight, and I saw you cross the room with a glass of lemonade for a man you had no reason to notice. And I thought—" He stopped.
"What did you think?" He looked at her straight on, and for the first time all evening, there was nothing managed in his face at all. "I thought that whoever you were, you deserved to know what room you'd actually walked into." Ren held that for a moment. Outside, the summer dark had finished settling over Virginia, and somewhere beyond the Hargrove Manor, the cicadas were running at full voice, indifferent to every calculation being made inside. Ren thought about her mother's hands on the laces that morning. She thought about her father at his desk, trying to make numbers work that wouldn't work. She thought about the way Kais Ashford had taken the glass from her hand and said thank you like it cost him something to say it, and meant every word. "All right," she said. "All right. I'll go to Ashford Park on Tuesday," she said. "I'll walk in as myself, with clear eyes and no illusions about what your mother is hoping for." She squared her shoulders slightly, and we'll see what happens when someone she planned to manage decides not to be managed. Something moved across his face, quiet and genuine, and entirely unguarded. "You're not afraid of her," he said. "I'm terrified of her," Ren said honestly. "But I've been terrified of things before. It doesn't seem to stop me from walking toward them." Kais Ashford looked at her for a moment with something in his eyes that she couldn't name and wasn't sure she was ready to. Then, across the room, his mother turned and found them with her gaze, and the moment closed. But it didn't disappear. It settled somewhere between them, quiet and stubborn, the way true things do, and Ren Holloway walked away from it, carrying the full weight of what she just agreed to, and the unsettling, inconvenient, completely unexpected sense that she was not walking in alone. Tuesday arrived the way difficult things always did, too fast and without mercy. Ren's mother had pressed her dress twice and said nothing about the invitation that wasn't practical. Her father had looked at her over his coffee with eyes that held too much and said even less. Nobody in the Holloway house talked about what Tuesday meant, because talking about it would have required admitting how much was riding on a young woman walking into another woman's home and performing well enough to matter. Ren rode to Ashford Park in the family's second-best carriage, which had a creak in the left wheel that announced her arrival before she'd fully stopped moving. She heard it when she stepped down. She didn't look to see who else heard it. Ashford Park was everything Hargrove Manor had wanted to be. Older, heavier. The kind of house that had absorbed 2 centuries of consequence into its walls and didn't feel the need to announce it. Ren walked through the front entrance and understood immediately that she was not on neutral ground. Every piece of furniture, every portrait in every corridor, every carefully arranged gathering of women in the east sitting room, all of it belonged to Lady Arabella. All of it was saying the same thing. You are a guest here. Remember what that means. There were 5 other women in the room when Ren arrived. She recognized 2 of them. Margaret Foss, whose father owned half the tobacco concerns in the county, and a younger woman named Harriet something, pretty and watchful, and clearly as uncertain as Ren felt, though considerably better at hiding it. The other 3 she didn't know, but she read them quickly. One nervous, one bored, one paying very close attention to everything and pretending not to. Lady Arabella received her with a smile and a hand clasp and a "Miss Holloway, how perfectly punctual," that managed to imply punctuality was a virtue associated with the serving class. "I appreciate the invitation, Lady Arabella," Ren said, and meant none of the gratitude and all of the acknowledgement. They sat. Tea was served. Lady Arabella ran the conversation like a general running a drill. Pleasant on the surface, testing underneath, moving each woman through a series of topics that revealed, if you were paying attention, exactly what she was looking for.
opinions on household management, views on country versus city, the correct balance between a woman's preferences and a family's obligations. Ren answered carefully and watched the room. Kais was not present. She hadn't expected him to be. This was not his gathering. It was his mother's audition. What she had not expected was the woman who arrived 20 minutes into the visit, announced by a servant at the door as Mrs. Clifton and Miss Clifton, and who swept in with the specific energy of someone who believed the party had been waiting for them to start. Lydia Clifton was perhaps 25, dark-haired, vivid, wearing a dress that had been chosen with deliberate precision. Her mother was the kind of woman who moved through rooms touching things, straightening picture frames, adjusting vase placement, small proprietary gestures that said, "I belong here," in ways that conversation couldn't quite manage. Lady Arabella rose to receive them with a warmth she had not produced for anyone else in the room. Ren noticed. The nervous woman beside her noticed too. She leaned slightly toward Ren and said, very quietly, "Miss Clifton was engaged to the Duke 2 years ago." The temperature of Ren's spine dropped about 3 degrees. "Was," she said, equally quiet. "It dissolved. No one quite knows why. The Cliftons have been visiting fairly regularly since the Duke returned from the north." Ren sat very still and processed this with a smile on her face that she maintained through sheer force of practiced will. Lady Arabella hadn't brought her here to audition. She'd brought her here to watch, to see whether Ren had any real claim worth considering, or whether she was simply furniture arranged for an afternoon before the room was reset to its preferred configuration. She looked at Lydia Clifton, laughing at something Lady Arabella said. The easy, knowing laugh of a woman who understood the room because she'd been in it before. Who touched the Duke's mother's arm like she'd done it 100 times, and felt something cold and clarifying move through her. She wasn't angry. Anger would have been a luxury. She was clear. She picked up her teacup, took a measured sip, and when Lady Arabella drew her into the general conversation 10 minutes later with a pointed, "Miss Holloway, you've been so quiet. What is your view on the question of estate management in times of financial difficulty?" Ren set her cup down and answered in complete, direct, unapologetic sentences that had not one word of performance in them. The nervous woman stared. The bored woman woke up. Lydia Clifton's eyes moved to her with an attention that hadn't been there before. Lady Arabella's smile didn't change, but something behind it did. The visit ended at 3 o'clock. Ren was shown out with the others, and she was almost to the carriage when she heard her name, quiet, deliberate, from a direction that was not the front door. She turned. Kais was standing at the side of the house, not in the formal entrance, not in any visible or public position. He had a coat on despite the heat, like a man who'd come from somewhere and hadn't quite stopped moving. She glanced back toward the front. The others were still sorting themselves into their respective carriages. She had perhaps 2 minutes. She walked toward him. "You were watching," she said. It wasn't an accusation. "From the study. The window looks onto the east sitting room if the angle's right." He paused. "I didn't plan to. I came in from the North Road and saw the carriages and—" He stopped. "I stayed longer than I intended." "You saw Lydia Clifton arrive?" His jaw tightened once. "Yes." "Were you going to tell me about her?" "I didn't know my mother had invited her." His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. "That was not— I didn't know." "But you knew she was still visiting?" "Yes." "And you knew your mother hadn't entirely released the idea of a match there?" A pause. "Yes." Ren held that for a moment. The creak-wheeled carriage sat waiting. The clock on this conversation was running. "Kais," she said, "I need you to be straight with me. Straight as you can be, right now, with whatever time we have." "All right." "Does your mother want you to marry Lydia Clifton?" "My mother," he said, "wants to control who I marry. Lydia is familiar, known, previously vetted." He met her eyes. "She also knows that I was deeply unhappy in that engagement, and that it ended because I wouldn't, go through with something that felt like a transaction dressed up in good manners." "And yet, here she is." "And yet," his mouth pressed flat, "my mother believes that what I object to is the mechanism, not the outcome. That if she manages the approach differently, the result will be what she wants." "Is she right?" The question landed hard. She watched it land. "No," he said. "Then say so, to her face, in plain language." "I have." "Then say it again." She kept her voice even. "Because right now, from where I'm standing, what I see is a room full of women your mother has assembled for one purpose, and Lydia Clifton arriving like the answer your mother already decided on, and you watching from a window instead of walking into that room and making your position clear." She paused. "What exactly are you afraid of?" The silence that followed lasted long enough to mean something. "She threatened to stop the tenancy negotiations," he said quietly. 300 families on estate land, Ren. Their lease terms come up for renewal in October. My mother still holds the legal authority over 2 of the 4 properties because my father's will was complicated. If she withholds cooperation on the renewal, those families are looking at terms they can't meet." Ren stared at him. "She threatened your tenants," she said, "to control your marriage." "She didn't say it directly," he said. "She never says anything directly. But I understand her meaning. I've had 30 years of practice." From the front of the house, a carriage door closed. Another minute, maybe less. "All right," Ren said. "That's what it cost you. What does it cost your tenants if you go along with what she wants and spend the rest of your life managed by a woman who uses people as instruments?" He had no answer for that. "I'm not telling you what to choose," she said. This isn't me arguing for myself. I'm asking because I think you already know what the right answer is, and you've spent 14 months being worn down from the knowing of it." She stepped back. "I have to go before someone sees us." "Ren," she stopped. "The Whitmore Ball," he said. 3 weeks. My mother is hosting it at Ashford Park. It's the largest gathering of the season. Half the county will be there." His voice was careful and deliberate. "I want you to come. Your mother will have already decided what that evening looks like." "Yes," he said. "I know." "And you're asking me to come anyway?" "I'm asking you to come because I intend to make some things clear," he said. "And I'd rather have you in the room when I do than not." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'll be there," she said. She turned and walked back to her carriage before she could examine how much she meant it, and she didn't look back, but she felt his eyes on her all the way to the drive, steady and certain as the sun. The 3 weeks between the Ashford Park visit and the Whitmore Ball were not quiet ones. Word moved fast in county society. It always did. And the particular word moving now was that the Duke of Ashford had been seen speaking to Ren Holloway at the Hargrove gathering, and then again, privately, at Ashford Park, and that Lady Arabella had invited Miss Holloway to a gathering that had also included the previously engaged Miss Clifton, which meant something, though no one could quite agree on what. Cecily Pratt had 3 versions of the story depending on who asked. Ren's mother said nothing and mended things that didn't need mending. Her father looked at her twice over the breakfast table in a week, which was twice more than usual. which meant he was thinking about things he hadn't said and wasn't going to say. Dorothea came to the house on a Wednesday and sat in the parlor and talked for 40 minutes without once saying Kais Ashford's name, which was the loudest thing she could have done. Ren spent those 3 weeks doing what she'd always done when things were shifting under her feet. She worked. She read her father's ledgers and found 3 places where the accounting could be restructured to buy them another quarter of breathing room. She wrote 2 letters on his behalf that he didn't know she'd written, to contacts in Richmond who owed the Holloway name goodwill from better years. She played the piano in the evenings until her mother stopped looking worried every time she came into the room. She did not write to Kais. He did not write to her. But 3 days before the Whitmore ball, a book arrived at the Holloway house. No card, no name, just a volume of political philosophy with a page marked near the middle. A passage about the difference between the obligation a man owes to custom and the obligation he owes to conscience. She read it twice, standing at the hall table, before she carried it upstairs, and didn't tell anyone it had come. The night of the Whitmore ball, Ren dressed in the best gown her family still owned. Deep green silk, 3 years old, but well kept, altered twice to stay current. Her mother did her hair with hands that were steady this time. "You look like yourself," her mother said when she was done. "Is that good?" Ren asked. "Tonight?" Her mother met her eyes in the mirror. "I think it's the only thing that'll matter." Ashford Park, in the full event, was something different from Ashford Park in the afternoon. Every room was lit, every corridor managed, every detail arranged with the particular perfection that Lady Arabella treated as a minimum standard. Ren walked in, knowing she was walking into territory that had been set up against her, and she walked in anyway. And she held her chin at the angle her mother had taught her, and she did not shake. She was inside for perhaps 8 minutes before it started. Lydia Clifton found her near the entrance to the main hall, found her with too much precision to be accidental, and smiled with warmth that had a very sharp thing underneath it. "Miss Holloway, I didn't know you were acquainted with the Ashford family." "We met at the Hargrove gathering," Ren said pleasantly. "Of course." Lydia tilted her head slightly. "You're the one who brought him the drink." "I brought a man who looked thirsty a drink," Ren said. "I didn't know who he was at the time." "But you know now." Lydia's smile didn't move. "And yet here you are." "And yet here we both are," Ren said. Lydia looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite hostility. It was more like assessment, and colder. "He's not what people think he is," she said. "He seems open, available, like a man who can be reached." She paused precisely. "He isn't. Whatever he's shown you, whatever you think has passed between you, he is his mother's son before anything else. I spent 8 months learning that." "I appreciate the warning," Ren said. "It isn't a warning." Lydia's voice was flat and final. "It's information. What you do with it is your business." She was gone before Ren could respond, absorbed back into the crowd with the ease of someone who'd spent years navigating rooms exactly like this one. Ren stood where she was for a moment and breathed. In the space of 10 minutes inside Ashford Park, she'd already been evaluated, warned off, and reminded of her place in a hierarchy she hadn't asked to join. She thought about Kais at the side of the house 3 weeks ago, watching from a window, talking about 300 tenants and a mother who held their futures in her legal authority. She thought about the marked page in the book that had arrived with no name on it. She moved into the hall. Kais found her 40 minutes into the evening. Not in a corner this time, not in a servant's coat, not through any pretense or strategy. He walked across the room in full view of everyone in it and came directly to where she was standing and said her name, without any of the careful distance that social protocol required. Every head in the room turned. Lady Arabella, across the space, went absolutely still. "You came," he said. "I said I would," Ren said. "How are you holding up?" "Miss Clifton found me within 8 minutes of my arrival," she said. "So I've had an interesting evening." Something moved through his jaw. "I didn't invite her." "I know. My mother, I know that too." She looked at him directly. "Kais, what did you mean when you said you wanted me in the room?" He held her gaze. Around them, conversations were continuing, or appearing to continue, with the strained quality of people listening very hard while pretending to look elsewhere. Lady Arabella had begun moving across the room. She was still 20 feet away, but closing. "I meant," he said, and his voice was very steady, "that I've spent 2 years letting my mother arrange the rooms I walk into, and the conversations I have in them, and the women I'm presented to. And I have been patient and obliging and quiet about it, because there are people depending on my cooperation, and I understand the weight of that." He paused. "But there is a point past which cooperation becomes surrender," Ren said. "Yes." The word came out with the force of something held back for a long time. "And I'm done surrendering." Lady Arabella arrived. She did not rush. Rushing would have looked like alarm, and Lady Arabella never permitted herself alarm in company. She moved into their conversation the way she always did, with the absolute certainty that her presence was the organizing principle of any space she entered. "Kais," she said, with a warmth that had ice at the center. "Miss Holloway, how lovely." She placed herself beside her son and looked at Ren with an expression that had welcome on the surface and dismissal underneath. "I'm so glad you could join us, Miss Holloway. Kais has so many obligations this evening. I'm sure you understand how it is." "I understand exactly how it is," Ren said. Lady Arabella blinked once, then smiled. "Kais, Lord Featherstone has been asking for you." "Something about the Leeds property." "There is no Leeds property discussion," Kais said. The smile held. "Darling, Mother." His voice was quiet, not unkind, but finished in a way that had no give in it. "I need you to hear me say something, and I need you to hear it clearly." The room had not stopped. People were still moving, glasses were still being raised. Somewhere across the hall, someone was laughing. But within the 10-foot radius of their conversation, the air had changed into something that held its breath. Lady Arabella's expression did not break, but something behind her eyes pulled tight. "This is not the time," she began. "It's the only time I seem to be able to make," he said, "because you manage every other one." He looked at her with the patient, bone-deep steadiness of a man who had thought about this moment for a very long time. "Lydia Clifton is here because you arranged it. This conversation is happening here, in public, because you have arranged every private moment I might have had with some particular outcome in mind. And I am telling you now, in the clearest language I have, that I will not be managed into a marriage, or out of one, or sideways from one, by anyone." Lady Arabella's voice dropped to a register that was perfectly controlled and completely dangerous. "You will embarrass this family." "The only thing embarrassing this family," he said, steady as bedrock, "is the idea that the Duke of Ashford cannot choose his own wife without interference." He paused. "I am choosing, Mother. I am choosing who I spend time with and who I trust and who I want to know better. And I need you to let me do that." Across the room, Lydia Clifton had gone very still. Cecily Pratt, 6 feet to Ren's left, had stopped pretending to look elsewhere. Lady Arabella looked at her son for a long, terrible moment. Then she looked at Ren, and it was the fullest, most unguarded look the woman had produced all evening. It wasn't malice. It was something almost worse. It was a woman looking at someone she'd underestimated and knowing it, and not being able to do a single thing about it in this room, in front of these people, in this moment. "We will discuss this," Lady Arabella said to her son, very quietly. "Yes," he agreed, "we will." She stepped back. She turned. She walked away with perfect composure, because that was what she'd spent 60 years learning to do. And she did it flawlessly. And she didn't look back. Kais stood beside Ren in the quiet left behind. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Better than I've been in 14 months, he said. And then, because neither of them had any more performance left in them tonight, "Dance with me." Ren looked at him. "The whole room is already watching," he said. "We might as well give them something worth seeing." She held out her hand. He took it, and every eye in the Whitmore ball followed them to the floor. Cecily Pratt's bright and sharp, Lydia Clifton's still and unreadable. And somewhere, on the far side of the room, Lady Arabella Ashford's, watching her son and the merchant's daughter who had walked into her carefully constructed evening and stood unmoved inside it, and understanding for the first time, with full and undeniable clarity, that the game she thought she was running had already changed hands. They danced one set, just one, but one was enough. One was more than enough, in a room like that, with eyes like those, and a history that half the county already thought they understood, and the other half was busy inventing. By the time the music stopped and Kais brought Ren back to the edge of the floor, the story had already written itself in 6 different versions, and was currently being carried toward the refreshment table in the hands of people who would have it in Richmond by Thursday. Ren knew this. Kais knew this. Neither of them said it, because neither of them needed to. "I should find my cousin," Ren said. Dorothea had come with her tonight, which had been a practical decision and was now a mercy. "I'll find you later," Kais said. Not a question, not a request. "All right," she said. She walked away from him and felt the room readjust around her in real time. Conversations tilting, glances landing and pulling back. The particular electric quality of a social gathering that has just absorbed a piece of information it doesn't know what to do with yet. Dorothea found her first. She materialized from behind a pillar with the expression of a woman who had witnessed something significant and was not sure whether to be thrilled or alarmed. "Ren," she said, "what just happened?" "I danced," Ren said. "You danced with the Duke of Ashford in full view of every person in this county, while his mother watched from across the room after he said something to her that made Cecily Pratt stop breathing for 30 seconds. Dorothea took her arm. "That is not just dancing, Ren." "I know what it is," Ren said. "Then tell me you know what comes next." Ren looked at her. "Lady Arabella is going to make things very difficult." "Yes." "And society is going to talk." "They're already talking. Right now, in real time, they are talking." "And my family," she stopped, started again. "My family is going to hear about this before I get home." "Your father is going to hear about this before your carriage reaches the gate," Dorothea said bluntly. "Ren, I love you. What do you want to happen?" The question was simple and enormous, and Ren stood inside it for a moment without flinching. What did she want? 3 months ago, the answer would have been easy and practical, and entirely about her family's ledgers and the careful navigation of a world that had the power to grind them into nothing. 3 months ago, she hadn't stood in a corner with a man in a servant's coat who had said thank you like he meant it. "I want to get through tonight," she said, "and then I want to think." Dorothea squeezed her arm once and let go. "Then let's get through tonight." They didn't make it 20 minutes. The message came through a servant. A folded note, no seal, slipped to Ren with the quiet efficiency of a household that had been doing Lady Arabella's bidding for decades. She opened it where she stood and read it in 3 seconds. "My sitting room. Now. Come alone." She handed the note to Dorothea, who read it and said nothing, which was the loudest response she could have given. "I'll be back," Ren said. "Ren, I'll be back," she said again. "I promise." Lady Arabella's private sitting room was on the 2nd floor, and the servant who led her there left without a word and closed the door from the outside. And Ren stood in a room that smelled of lavender and old money, and the specific kind of authority that had never once in its existence been questioned, and met the full force of Lady Arabella Ashford's attention without looking away. "Sit down," Lady Arabella said. "I'm fine standing, thank you." A pause. Something moved across the older woman's face. Brief, controlled, recalibrated. "As you like." She sat herself, in the chair nearest the window, with the straight-backed posture of a woman who had never once in her life sat in a way that conceded anything. "I'll be direct." "Please," Ren said. "What happened downstairs cannot continue." "What happened downstairs," Ren said carefully, "was a dance."
"What happened downstairs," Lady Arabella said, "was my son making a public statement in front of every family of consequence in this county. And that statement has implications that go well beyond what either of you appear to have considered." She folded her hands in her lap. "Kais is not a free man, Miss Holloway. He carries obligations that were old before he was born. His choices, his public choices, affect the lives of people who have nothing to do with whatever romantic impulse has evidently taken hold of him in the last several weeks." "He told me about the tenants," Ren said. "He told me about October." Lady Arabella went very still. "He told me about the lease renewals," Ren continued, "and about the legal authority you hold over 2 of the 4 properties, and about what you implied would happen to those families' terms if he didn't cooperate with your arrangements." She kept her voice level and her hands loose at her sides. "I want you to know that I understand the situation fully. I'm not operating under any illusions about what's at stake." The silence that followed was the loudest Ren had experienced in a room that size. Lady Arabella looked at her for a long time. When she finally spoke, something in her voice had changed. Not softened exactly, but shifted. The way a chess player's posture shifts when they realize they're looking at a different game than the one they thought they were playing. "He told you that?" "Yes." "When?" 3 weeks ago, at the side of your house after your afternoon gathering." Ren paused. "He wanted me to understand what room I'd walked into. He seems to believe that people deserve to know what's being asked of them before they're asked for it." Lady Arabella's jaw tightened once. "He doesn't understand what he's—" "He understands completely," Ren said. "That's what frightens you." She said it without cruelty, just straight and plain, the way her father had taught her to say true things when the saying of them mattered. "He knows exactly what his cooperation costs, and what refusing it costs, and he's trying to find a way through that doesn't require him to stop being himself in the process. That's not a naive man. That's a man with a conscience your family forgot to train out of him." The room held still. Lady Arabella's eyes moved over her with the slow, complete attention of a woman conducting a final assessment. Then she said, "What do you want, Miss Holloway?" "The same thing I wanted at the Hargrove gathering," Ren said. "Nothing from you."
Everyone wants something. I want my family to be all right, Ren said. I want my father's name to mean something again. I want my mother to stop mending things that don't need mending because she can't afford to stop moving. She paused. None of those things require me to be your instrument. And my son? Ren held the older woman's gaze and didn't pretend. I don't know yet what your son and I are to each other. I know that he is the most honest person I've encountered in 3 years of navigating rooms that run entirely on performance. I know that I'm not interested in hurting him. I know that whatever happens between us, I intend for it to be chosen by both of us and not arranged by anyone else. Lady Arabella was quiet for a long time. The tenants, she said finally. Yes. You understand that the lease negotiations are not a bluff. I understand that you believe that, Ren said. I also understand that you are a woman who has spent 60 years building something that she loves, and that what you love is not just the estate, or the title, or the social position. It's the continuity, the permanence of it. She held steady. I don't think you want to be the woman who destroyed 300 families' livelihoods to win an argument with your own son. I don't think that's the legacy you've been working toward. Something moved through Lady Arabella's face that Ren had no name for. It was old and complicated, and had more loss in it than she'd expected. You are, the older woman said slowly, a very unusual young woman. My mother would say I'm just stubborn, Ren said. The ghost of something, almost, not quite, nearly a different version of this woman, moved across Lady Arabella's expression. Leave us to October, she said. The lease negotiations. Leave that to me and to Kais to resolve between us. You stay out of it. If you're asking me not to interfere in your son's business, I'm asking you, Lady Arabella said, with the precision of a woman who chose every word at full value, to trust that some things were in motion long before you arrived, and that the people responsible for them are still capable of managing them. It wasn't a concession. It wasn't a surrender. It was something more ambiguous than either, and Ren was honest enough with herself to admit she didn't entirely know what to do with it. All right, she said. She turned to go. Miss Holloway. She stopped. My son, Lady Arabella said, and her voice had changed again, lower, stripped of its formal precision, carrying something that Ren recognized because she'd heard it in her own mother's voice when the lights were low and the performance was over. He has not been easy to reach since his father, since the engagement ended. A pause. I have been managing things, as you say, because it seemed to me that someone had to, and he wasn't available for it. Ren turned back slowly. I am not, Lady Arabella said, a sentimental woman. But I did not arrange all of this out of cruelty. She looked at her hands. I wanted him settled, safe, with someone who would hold still beside him. I understand, Ren said. And she did. Incompletely, imperfectly, but enough to see the shape of it. I don't require your understanding, Lady Arabella said, and the armor was back, perfectly fitted and fully in place. I require only that you know what you're walking into, if you're walking into it. I know, Ren said. I've known for some time. She left the room and stood in the corridor for a moment, with her eyes closed and her back to the door, and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The conversation she'd just held with a woman who could end her family's remaining prospects with a signature, and had chosen, for reasons Ren didn't entirely understand, not to. Then she opened her eyes and walked back downstairs. Kais was waiting at the bottom of the staircase, not pretending to be doing something else, just standing there, watching for her, making no attempt to disguise it. How bad, he said when she reached him. Less bad than I expected, she said.
Better than she wanted it to be, I think. He searched her face. What did she say?
She told me to stay out of the October negotiations. And she told me your father's death was harder on her than she shows. Ren paused. I believe her. I'm not sure it changes anything material, but I believe her. Something moved through his expression, old and complicated. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been angry at a person they also love for a very long time and can't entirely separate the two. She's not a villain, Ren. I know that, Ren said. Villains are simpler. He looked at her for a moment, with something in his face that had been building all evening and was getting close to the surface. I need to tell you something. The quality of his voice pulled her attention fully upright. The book I sent, he said, 3 weeks ago. I read it. I had a conversation with my solicitor the same week, he said, about the properties.
About my father's will and the legal structure of the estate authority. He paused. My mother's hold on those 2 properties. It's not as absolute as she presented it to me. There's a clause. My father put it in deliberately, I think, because he understood her. If I formally contest the arrangement before October, the leases default to my authority, not hers. Ren stared at him. You've known this for 3 weeks. I've known it's possible for 3 weeks, he said. Acting on it it's a legal confrontation with my own mother over my father's estate. It is ugly and public, and it will damage things that may not recover. He held her gaze. But it means 300 families don't have their futures held over my head every time my mother wants something from me. Then do it, Ren said. It will make enemies. You already have them, she said. At least these ones you chose. He went quiet for a moment. If I do this, if I contest the arrangement and take formal authority of the properties, it changes my position. It changes what I'm able to offer, and it changes, he said carefully, what I'm able to ask for. She understood what he was saying, the pieces of it, the weight of it. Kais, I'm not asking tonight, he said quickly. I'm not. I know what tonight has already been. I'm not adding to it. He paused. I just need you to know what I'm deciding, and why. Ren stood in the corridor at the foot of Lady Arabella's staircase and felt the full shape of the last 3 months settle around her like something solid. The corner at the Hargrove gathering, the creak-wheeled carriage, the note with no name, the dance, the sitting room, and now this man telling her what he was going to do and why, with no calculation in it. Just the plain and honest offering of a person who had decided she was someone worth being honest with. My father's ledges, she said. I found 3 places where we can restructure the accounting. It buys us another quarter, maybe 2. It's not a solution, but it's time. He looked at her. I'm telling you because you told me, she said simply. That's how I want this to work, whatever this is. That's how I want it to work too, he said. Across the hall, the music had started again. Through the open doors, the Whitmore Ball continued its careful, glittering performance of a world that ran on appearance and position and the management of other people's choices. And neither Ren Holloway nor Kais Ashford was paying it much attention. My mother is going to come back downstairs in approximately 10 minutes, Kais said, and she is going to resume managing this evening. Yes, Ren agreed. And tomorrow there will be talk and consequences, and a great deal of noise from people who were watching tonight and have drawn their own conclusions. There will. And October is coming, he said, and the solicitor, and the legal confrontation, and all the rest of it. It's coming regardless, Ren said. The question is just how you're standing when it gets here. He looked at her for a long, still moment. Then, how are you so certain about things? I'm not certain about anything, she said honestly. I'm just tired of being afraid of what I want
Because it's inconvenient for everyone around me. She met his eyes. Your father's portrait is in the North Gallery. I saw it when I came up the stairs 3 weeks ago. You recognized him? He looked like you, she said. Same jaw, same way of looking at something like he was deciding whether to trust it. She paused. He looked like a man who put that clause in his will on purpose. Kais was very quiet. I think he knew, Ren said gently, what she was capable of, when she was frightened. And he left you a way out, in case you needed it. Whatever had been building behind Kais Ashford's eyes for the better part of 3 months arrived then. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just a shift in his face that was profound and quiet. The particular look of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just, unexpectedly, been understood. He did, Kais said. His voice was rougher than it had been. I think he did. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then, from somewhere above them, came the soft sound of a door opening on the second floor. And both of them knew without looking that Lady Arabella was preparing to come back down, and that the 10 minutes Kais had estimated was closer to 7, and that the evening was not over, and the world was still its difficult, watchful, calculating self, and would be tomorrow, and the day after. Kais, Ren said. Yes. Contest the arrangement, she said. Do it soon. Do it before she finds another lever. She held his gaze. And then, after all that, whatever is left between us when the noise settles, let's decide then what we're going to do with it. He looked at her for a moment, with everything in his face that he'd spent the evening being too careful to show. And then he said, That's the most sensible and maddening thing anyone has ever said to me. I'll take that, Ren said. She straightened, squared her shoulders, and turned toward the hall where the music was still playing, and the county was still watching, and everything still mattered in all the ways it had always mattered. Behind her, she heard Kais move, felt him fall into step a half pace to her right, not leading, not following, just beside her. And they walked back into the light together, like two people who had decided, quietly and without ceremony, that they were done navigating the same rooms at opposite ends. Overhead, Lady Arabella's footsteps reached the top of the staircase and paused. And in the pause, Ren could have sworn she heard something. Not surrender, not approval, not any of the things she might have hoped for. Just the long, weighted silence of a woman at the top of her own stairs, watching two people walk forward together, and finally, for the first time, saying nothing at all. The legal filing landed on Lady Arabella's breakfast table on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after the Whitmore ball, and by Wednesday afternoon, every family of consequence in the county knew something had happened inside Ashford Park that had nothing to do with the weather. Kais had moved fast, faster than Ren had expected, and she'd expected fast. His solicitor had filed the formal contestation of the estate authority arrangement on a Monday, which meant Kais had gone directly from the ball to his study and started writing. And the thought of that, the image of him at his desk in the dark after an evening that had already cost everyone something, settled into Ren's chest with a weight that wasn't quite sadness, and wasn't quite pride, and was something made of both. She heard about the filing from Dorothea, who heard it from her dressmaker, who heard it from a woman whose husband had business with the Ashford solicitor's office. This was how information traveled in Virginia in 1815. Not through any official channel, but through the 1,000 small tributaries of domestic life, flowing from household to household, until it arrived at your door, dressed up as gossip, and carrying the full force of fact. He did it, Dorothea said, standing in the Holloway parlor with her bonnet still on. He actually filed. I know, Ren said.
You knew he was going to? I told him to. Dorothea stared at her for a long moment. Then she sat down in the nearest chair without removing her bonnet and said, "Tell me everything." Ren told her. Not everything. There were pieces of those conversations that belonged only to the rooms they'd happened in. But enough. Enough for Dorothea to understand the shape of it, the sequence of decisions, the careful and deliberate way two people had moved towards something that neither of them had planned for, and both of them had chosen anyway. When she finished, Dorothea was quiet for a moment. Then, "Lady Arabella is going to come after you." "I know. Not in the sitting room way, not in the polite social management way. She is going to use everything she has." "She doesn't have as much as she did," Ren said. "That's the point. She still has the 2 properties during the contestation period. That takes time, legal time, months maybe. And in those months, she has leverage, and she has motive, and she has 60 years of knowing how this county works." Dorothea leaned forward. "Ren, I'm not saying don't. I'm saying know what you're walking into." "I know what I'm walking into," Ren said. "I've known since the Hargrove gathering." "You didn't know him at the Hargrove gathering." "No," Ren admitted. "But I knew the room. And I knew what kind of person offers a thirsty man a drink when everyone else is looking the other way." She met her cousin's eyes. "That's the kind of person I want to be, Dottie, regardless of what it costs." Dorothea looked at her for a long time. Then she reached across and took her hand and squeezed it once, hard, and let go. "All right," she said. "What do you need?" What Ren needed, it turned out, arrived before she could ask for it. The letter came from Kais the next morning. Not through any servant, not through any formal channel, but delivered by a young man on a gray horse who knocked on the Holloway front door at 8 o'clock and handed it to Ren directly, and rode away without waiting for a response. The letter was 3 pages in Kai's handwriting, which was clean and direct, and looked exactly like the way he talked, and it said the following things in the following order. That the filing had gone through without complication, and his solicitor was confident in the legal foundation. That his mother had received the news in silence, which he had found more unnerving than anger. That the Clifton family had withdrawn from further social engagements with the Ashfords, which he reported without commentary. That he had spent the better part of the last 11 days thinking about a conversation at the bottom of a staircase, and had arrived at a conclusion he wanted to share in person if she would allow him to call. The last line said, "I am not asking for anything you haven't already offered. I am asking only whether the noise has settled enough for us to find out what's left." Ren read it twice at the hall table, then carried it upstairs, then came back down and told her mother she was expecting a caller. Her mother looked at her for a moment with eyes that had understood the shape of this for some time. "When?" she said. "I'll write back this morning," Ren said. "Tomorrow, if he can." "Then I'll make sure the parlor is ready," her mother said, and went to do it. And that was the whole of the conversation, which was the most her mother had ever said without speaking. Kais arrived the next day at 2 o'clock, in a proper calling coat, on a horse that was neither showy nor plain, and he knocked on the front door of the Holloway house like a man who had thought about this moment and decided to meet it simply. Ren's father received him in the front room for 15 minutes, while Ren sat in the parlor and listened to the low rumble of their voices through the wall, and told herself she was not nervous, which was not entirely true. When her father came to the parlor door, he looked at Ren with an expression she had not seen on his face in 3 years. Something steady and unguarded and full, like a man who had set something heavy down and hadn't yet figured out how to hold his hands without it. He said, "He's a plain-spoken man." "Yes," Ren said. "I appreciate that." He paused. "He told me about the filing, about what he was contesting and why." Another pause,
Longer. He said he wanted me to know the situation honestly before he spoke to you. Ren's throat tightened. He would. Her father looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped aside from the doorway and said nothing else, which was everything. Kais came into the parlor and sat across from her, and her mother appeared briefly with tea, and then disappeared with the specific tact of a woman who had spent 20 years learning when to leave a room, and they were alone. Your father shook my hand, Kais said. He doesn't do that lightly, Ren said. I know. He told me. Something almost like a smile moved across his face. He also told me that you restructured his accounting without telling him and bought the family 2 quarters of breathing room, and that he found out when his solicitor mentioned it, and that he has been trying to decide how to feel about it since. Ren blinked. He told you that? He did. What did you say? I said it sounded exactly like something you would do, Kai said, and that in my experience, the things you did without telling anyone were usually the most useful ones. She looked at him for a moment. How is she? He knew who she meant. He always knew what she meant, she was noticing. There was a particular economy to their conversations that she hadn't found with anyone else. Quiet, he said, which is harder than anger with her. Anger, I know. Quiet means she's deciding something. Are you worried? I'm prepared, he said. There's a difference. He set his cup down. Ren, I need to say something to you directly. Then say it. The contestation will take 4 to 6 months to resolve fully. In that time, my mother retains legal authority over the Marsden property and the Clifton Road holdings. She cannot use that authority to harm the tenant families without exposing herself to her own legal consequences. My solicitor has made that clear to her solicitor. But she can make the process slow and difficult and public. He paused. And she can, and likely will, make your family's position in society uncomfortable. You've been associated with this situation clearly enough that anyone wanting to stay in her favor is going to distance themselves. I know, Ren said. It could affect your father's business contacts. I know that too. I want to offer, don't, she said, not unkindly. Don't offer to fix it. That's not why I made the choices I made. She held his gaze. I made them because they were right. I'll live with what they cost. He looked at her across the parlor table with the same full, uncalculated attention he'd given her at the Hargrove gathering, when she'd handed him a glass of lemonade, and he'd looked at her like a man trying to understand something he hadn't encountered before. I came today, he said, because I wanted to ask you something, and I want to ask it clearly, with no management and no arrangement and no one else's hand in it. Ren's heart moved in her chest. I have spent 14 months, Kai said, being told what I needed and what I owed and what I ought to want. I have been handled and maneuvered and introduced and evaluated, and every conversation I've had in that time has felt like a negotiation with terms I didn't set. He paused. And then I stood in a corner in a borrowed servant's coat, and a woman I'd never met crossed a room to give me a drink because I looked thirsty. And she didn't know who I was, and she didn't need anything from me. And she argued with me about hospitality when I tried to decline it. Ren managed to breathe steadily. I don't need you to fix anything, he said. I don't need you to manage anything, or be strategic, or perform anything for anyone's benefit. I need... He stopped. Tried again. I would like to know if you'll let me call on you. Properly, formally, with full knowledge of what it means and what it will cost, and without any of my mother's fingerprints on the arrangement. The parlor was very quiet. Outside, somewhere on Market Street, someone's horse was making its opinion known about something. Yes, Ren said. Yes. Yes, she said again, because once hadn't felt like enough. Kais, Yes. He exhaled, just slightly, just enough to tell her that he had been holding that breath since he'd knocked on the front door, and the tension that had lived in his jaw since the Whitmore ball released, and for a moment she saw what he looked like when nothing was being managed. When the 30 years of obligation and expectation and loss had been set down long enough to breathe, and he just looked like a man in a parlor on a Thursday afternoon who had just heard what he'd hoped to hear. "I should tell you," he said, and his voice was lighter than she'd heard it, "that Cecily Pratt has already drafted at least 3 accounts of this. I know because her housemaid told my housemaid, and my housemaid told my valet, and my valet apparently felt I should be informed." Ren laughed, genuine, uncontained, the kind she'd caught in her teeth at the Hargrove gathering, and now let go entirely. "What are the 3 versions?" "In one, you've entrapped me.
In another, I've lost my mind to grief. In the third, and I believe this is her preferred version, we've been secretly conducting an attachment since the Hargrove gathering, and the entire county was deceived."
"The third one is almost true," Ren said. "Almost," he agreed. The following weeks moved differently than the ones before them. Not easily. Nothing about their situation allowed for easy. But differently. With intention. With the specific texture of 2 people who had decided what they wanted and were moving toward it instead of around it. Kais called on the Holloways twice a week, formally and properly, and stayed the correct amount of time, and spoke to her father with the directness her father valued, and brought her mother a book of botanical illustrations the second time, because he had listened carefully to something Ren had mentioned about her mother's garden, and acted on it without making a performance of it. Her mother kept the book on the parlor table.
Her father stopped looking at his ledgers with the expression of a man reading his own verdict.
And Ren walked through the days with something she hadn't carried in 3 years. Not certainty, not safety, not the absence of difficulty. Just the clean and grounded knowledge that she was moving in the right direction, on ground she'd chosen, beside a person she'd chosen, without anyone's hand at her back pushing her somewhere she hadn't agreed to go. The social consequences arrived exactly as predicted. 2 families who had been warm toward the Holloways became cooler. An invitation that had been tentatively extended was quietly withdrawn.
It came in the form of a letter, hand-delivered to the Ashford Park study, while Kais was in the middle of reviewing the October lease renewal documents, from his mother's personal writing desk, sealed with her seal, in her handwriting. His solicitor was present. His man of business was present. Both of them watched him open it. He read it once. He set it down. He picked it up and read it again. Then he rode to the Holloway house without sending word first, which he had never done. And Ren knew something had happened before he dismounted. "What is it?" she said, at the front door. He handed her the letter. She read it standing on the front step with the summer afternoon around her. It was 2 pages. Lady Arabella's handwriting was exact and controlled, and looked precisely like her voice. The letter said the following: that she had consulted with her own solicitor, independently of Kais's, and had received counsel that she had found, the word she used was, clarifying. That her late husband had not, as she had believed, constructed the estate arrangement to preserve her authority. He had constructed it to protect it from her. The distinction, as her solicitor had explained it, was significant. That she had spent 3 weeks sitting with this information before she was prepared to address it. That she was withdrawing her contestation of Kais's contestation, effective immediately. And that the full estate authority over all 4 properties would be transferred to his control without further legal proceeding. The last paragraph said, "Your father left you that clause because he trusted you. I have spent 14 months being afraid that you were not ready.
I am prepared to admit that I was wrong about the timeline, if not about the fear itself. The Holloway girl is sharper than I gave her credit for. She told me that I was not a villain, and I have been thinking about that ever since, because no one has said that to me in a long time, and meant it as a complicated thing rather than a simple one. I suppose that is her particular quality. I imagine it will serve you both well. There was no closing sentiment, just the signature. Lady Arabella Ashford, and underneath it, in smaller letters, as if she had written it and then reconsidered removing it and decided to leave it. Your mother. Ren lowered the letter. She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. She did it herself, Kais said quietly. She withdrew before the court required it, before I could win it. He paused. That's, for her, that's, I know what that is, Ren said. She quoted you. I know. The villain line, he said. I've been trying to imagine that conversation since October. It was a good conversation, Ren said. Difficult, but good. She looked at him. What do you need to do? I need to go back to my solicitor, he said. And then I need to speak to my mother. Go, she said. Ren, go, she said again. This was always going to have to happen between the two of you. I've been a reason for it, not a substitute for it. She folded the letter carefully and held it out to him. Go talk to your mother. He took the letter. He looked at her for a moment with everything in his face that he'd long since stopped trying to conceal from her. Then he said, When I come back, I'll be here, she said. He came back 3 days later. He came back with the lease renewal documents signed and delivered to all 300 tenant families, with the estate authority fully transferred and documented, with his solicitor satisfied and his man of business relieved, and his mother, reportedly, in her garden for the first time in 14 months. He came back and sat in the Holloway parlor and looked at Ren across the tea table and said, I want to ask your father something. Ren set down her cup very carefully. Does he know you're coming? I wrote to him this morning. What did you say? I said I had a question that required his answer, and that I hoped he would receive me, and that I understood if the situation warranted whatever consideration he needed to take. He paused. He wrote back in 2 hours and said to come at 2 o'clock. That's fast, Ren said. Your father, Kais said, is not a man who benefits from extended deliberation. No, she agreed. He isn't. Thomas Holloway received Kais Ashford in the front room for 20 minutes. Ren sat in the parlor and did not listen at the door, because she was her mother's daughter and had been raised with certain standards, and because her mother was sitting 3 feet away from her and would have noticed. When her father came to the parlor door the second time, he looked at her with the same expression as before, the one she hadn't seen in 3 years. And this time it was fuller, settled, like a man who had not just set something heavy down, but had also finally figured out how to hold his hands without it. He's a plain-spoken man, her father said again. You said that before, Ren said. I mean it more now, he said. He stepped aside. Kais came into the parlor. Her mother rose, quietly, and left the room, with the same tact as before, and took her father with her by some wordless domestic communication that Ren had never entirely decoded. And then they were alone. He said yes, Kais said. Ren's heart did something that had no tidy name. He said yes, she said. He also said that you'd already done half the work yourself, and that if I was going to be part of this family, I should know that that was how the Holloway women operated, and that I'd better be prepared, because you told me what room I'd walked into before I'd earned the right to ask you to. Because you walked into my mother's sitting room and told her the truth about herself in language she could actually hear. And then you told me to go make peace with her. Because you understood that some things were between us, and didn't require you to carry them. He crossed the parlor in 2 steps and took her hands, and she let him. And for a moment, neither of them said anything because there was nothing that needed saying that the quiet didn't already hold. Outside on Market Street, the summer of 1815 continued being hot and relentless and indifferent to the particular gravity of parlor conversation. And Ren Holloway, who had walked into a glittering room full of people performing the careful work of being important, and had looked right past all of it and seen a man who was thirsty and offered him water, stood in her own parlor with her hands in the hands of a duke who had loved her before he had any right to say so, and understood fully and finally that she had not been rescued from her life. She had walked into it, clear-eyed and stubborn and entirely herself, and built something true inside it. And that was a thing no arrangement, no management, no social machinery, and no frightened and powerful woman at the top of a staircase could ever take back. They had chosen each other in a world designed to make that choosing impossible, and they were going to keep choosing, every day, in full view of everyone watching. And that choice, made freely and kept fiercely, was the only title either of them had ever needed.